that at all?
What do you make it?
Blender. I'm actually going to touch on that too. So there was a reason why I put that together. Okay, so that was just a little front page. Different one, that's the title. The real title I came up with was Stop Building Websites and Start Managing Them. I think what I actually said to Patrick on Skype as a concept of, stop, what did I say? Long-term management of data and content in websites. Now, it's very broad. Really, it's a little bit of a story about a certain experience that we've encountered recently, but mainly to do with the managing of large amounts of data in your components. So let's say simply you've got a component you've been using for 5 years in a client's website. It's got a lot of data in it. You don't exactly know what to do with it, but you've got this much better product you want to go over and start using. So what do you do with it? Do you just rebuild it? That's kind of the focus on what we're going to talk about. So a couple of questions basically to kind of get the thing going is for me first, have we got many people out there that develop a lot of websites? So more than 50 under your belt in the last few years or something like that. Yep. Okay, so this will be specifically good, I think, for that sort of audience. These were the questions that I've always been asking myself, because we are trying to run a business that is turning over websites but being able to service those clients well, but have a better solution than having to migrate all the time and try and micromanage websites. It's a real theme that started to evolve. When we first started building Joomla websites, it was really quite a small system. You just threw stuff in and put a website together, and that was sort of how we treated it. But now it's sort of become so much more important from the client perspective that data not be lost if we're just going to start again and start repopulating things. So like, how many active sites, the different types of components. If you've used lots of different types of components and you spend a lot of time researching components, I find that you do tend to trend away from something after a while, whether it be because the developer's gone quiet or they've started going down a path that you're not really happy with their component and you found something else that's a lot better. So what do we do with it? There has to be sort of a better way to manage that data. So it's more about the content, not so much content specific to Joomla content. So an example of this situation that we had was a website called Clayton Firearms. It was a Joomla 1.5 website. It had Vegemite 1 e-commerce installation, and it was an extremely active website. If you Google rimfire rifles, for example, they're number one on the rankings. It's got a lot of organic SEO, so it's there's a lot of considerations to take into account for this type of site. Large amount of product data and associated products. So if anyone used Vegemite? Few people, yes. Product relationships. So if you've got a related product, so you've got one set of bullets and the related product might be the particular gun or something like that, and you might have 5 related products. So if you think 1,500 products, I think about 500 of their products have related products with a minimum of 2, maximum about 5 or 6 related products. So there's a lot of data that we had to try and keep in mind. People might already be starting to say, well, what about migration tools, standard migration tools? Every component are bringing out their own migration tools, but sometimes they don't always work according to plan, and we found that in this environment. So all they wanted to do originally was actually develop an e-commerce component. So we had Vegemite in, but we didn't actually have online sales. Because it was a gun site, it was a very complicated scenario to put online sales into the mesh. So they just wanted to do that, but it was a 1.5 website, so we really just had no option but to try and sell them on the idea of completely upgrading and rebuilding. So we also had a couple of other problems. Because it wasn't an e-commerce website, there was no GST formulas installed, so all the pricing system was just retail pricing. So the price in the database was the price plus GST. But when you're doing e-commerce and you've got to do GST invoicing, the prices in Vegemite have to be ex GST. So that sounds like just one small piece of the puzzle, but it's a very big puzzle. So we also wanted to make sure that our Ceph URLs were going to be reusable, so we could actually retain the same product IDs and things like that, and that comes into play later on. We also set up or started setting up in the old website, in planning for turning on the e-commerce solutions, an ability to be able to have two different templates for the product. So each category within the product range had the ability to have a product display of e-commerce, buy or no buy. So you could have a shopping cart option or a no shopping cart option, and it was template specific and it was assigned to the category itself. So they'd already implemented all that data. It was a fair bit of work for them to do that. So we wanted to make sure we carried that information across to the new system. Vegemite 2 does things a lot different to Vegemite 1 too when it comes to databases. Until you start looking right down deep into it, you don't really know how complicated it becomes. Oh, can you get me a water or something? Oh, let's do this one. So we'd hope for a straightforward process using the standard migration tools. We're just going to install the latest version of everything, migrate the content with JUpgrade or something similar, migrate VM content with the migration tools, but we started to run into issues with different things in the process that sort of meant that we couldn't do that. Some of those problems, we had an issue where we couldn't actually transfer the information in relation to the images because there was this MIME type error issue coming up, and I had no idea what this was in relation to. I couldn't find any solutions for it, so it was just one of the pieces of the puzzle that wasn't working. The data just wasn't transferring across the way it should have, so we didn't even think we were going to be able to use it at all. We managed to get kind of the data across with most of the information, but it was missing a lot of pieces. And if we just relied on those, you know, the components migration tool, we would have been preparing for a long time. So I really wanted to be able to find another way of doing it. And also in the back of my head, I had the concept of wanting to be able to migrate data from component A to component B anyway, whether it be Vegemite to Vegemite or Vegemite to Redcard or anything. The idea was already there to start looking at those sorts of theories. So I started to look for different solutions. So first I thought, well, it can't be that hard. I'll write some PHP scripts manually writing conversion processes until finding how much different the two databases were and how much work there was going to be to be able to separate certain elements of the database itself and put it back together in a tangible way without, and also during that bug check process of being able to just change that, just being able to repair that code or change that code a little bit to make it a little bit better. It was going to take too long, and you know, I'm a PHP coder, but I'm not a builder. I'm not that proficient with PHP, so it wasn't a time-efficient way of doing things. So firstly, it's, you know, good old Google to the rescue. Time to go out and start searching for what solutions might be out there. So some of the search terms, you know, visual data mapping and MySQL data migration and different things like that. We came up with a few answers that looked like they could have solved the problem for us. I don't know if anyone's heard of MySQL Workbench. Yes. I looked at it, it looked like it was going to do the job for me, but it wasn't a simple process. It looked like there was a bit of a learning curve involved to get to the end result that I needed. And I had a better idea for how to do this stuff. And this is where we're going to talk about another concept that I've seen in the 3D rendering program that I did that logo in. Is called Blender, and it's an open source 3D rendering piece of software, very forward thinking, very innovative. They're coming up with some amazing theory in how they develop their usability, and because the program is so elaborate, it's so complicated. If you saw everything in front of you, you'd be very confused. So they've developed some technology. One of them has been called nodes, and when you're actually developing a piece of texture or something like that, you can actually go into the texture specifics and go into node editing view. I'm not going to show examples of it, but go into this node editing view and you can have a texture and then an effect filter and something else, and they're all just nodes. They're all just little boxes on a page, and then you join the dots between all of their little circles on the sides of those boxes, and so you can actually see through a visual process what was happening with that information and how it's being affected through the process. And that sort of made sense to me because it was visual, it was easy to understand. So my theory was, well, wouldn't it be nice if I could convert data from A to B with a nice big visual thing in the middle that could help me do it? So I don't need to be a coder. I don't need to know exactly everything. I just got to know a little bit about what those things are in the middle and how they might work. So in that theory, we refined our searches a little bit more, and here we go. We have found this product called October MapForce 2013. Anyone heard of that? Yes. One.
Only because you told me that.
Yeah. Now, if you have, well, if most people haven't seen it, it looks very overwhelming in this diagram. But if you can see that we've got the titles up the top, I'm not sure if you can read them. We've got a basic map of one of the master category tables of Virtuemart 1 to Virtuemart 2. This was the end result. I just took a little screen of the bit in the middle. But when I saw the front page of the Altover website being... that's all right. Yeah, I won't bother transferring. I don't really have much web stuff to go to, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. When I first saw the website, it had a similar type of diagram on the front to this, and I just said, that's exactly what I want. I was nearly sold on it before I'd even opened it, before I'd even looked at it. I was sort of thinking, yes, I was that desperate. And it looked to do, just by knowing enough about code and how standard languages, interpret things. We've got certain things like concat, meaning join two things together, and there's this whole range of different tools available, and I'm going to go into the program in a sec. We'll have a good look at them. But what it allowed me to do is bring data from the old Virtuemart category table, run it through a certain process, and then put it where it needed to be in this table. But that wasn't the end. There was obviously another, we've got 8 of these files that we had to do to just get this certain sequence to work. But some of the data you didn't need to bring across, or you used it in 2 places, or if you didn't use it all, you didn't override it. You can see a C up there that just has a 1 in front of it, and that just is a piece of manual code. There's also a couple of others down below. So they're just saying, put a 1 in here, because we just wanted to override it. We didn't need to convert whatever was over here, because it might not have existed until over here. So that's the basics of it. It is a commercial product. I'm not associated with these guys. I like it. I've just started playing with it, and that's why I wanted to make this presentation about it, and it was focused around it because it's one of the solutions I found about database management. It's not all about the product itself. It's what we need to start thinking about what we're doing with our data and our websites or our components long term. So that's the basics of it. €399. So that basically paid for itself straight away for me. Now, I'm going to switch over to there we go. Okay, is that working all right? Oh God, that's tiny. Okay, I'm going to have to do a lot of scrolling. I didn't know how big it was going to be in the presentation window. Obviously a lot smaller than I counted on. This is the interface, and down the side we've got a whole bunch of pre-saved files that I've created. So you can see there that we did 3 different things for categories. Then I still had to do stuff with products and prices, and there was associated products and things like that. So I just sort of started numbering them and naming them so I could understand it. But if we have a look at it, I'll move over to, now is that full screen? Nope. Oh, it's even dropped out my other thing. There's supposed to be something down the bottom here. I'm just trying to work out where it is. That's not open. It actually has all of the tools available over the side here. So instead of just being in project, like I did say, I am only just starting to use this. No, I can't think of how to turn it on off the top of. You reckon? Yeah. Annotations task. We're looking for one that says show.
Store toolbars in Windows.
I'll try that. Okay. It's still there. There we go. Yes, thank you. All right, so over the side here you can see there's a whole bunch of functions. So if we're starting, obviously now that we've just opened it again from nothing, we've got nothing to work with. But over here we've got all of these things that we can just bring out. Now we don't have any data to talk to at the moment, but you can see it's drag and drop. And we've got arrows that can be used to join some dots. So if we want to go through and start mapping things, through a certain process, be this a logical process that's calculating a formula and then sending it to lowercase values and adding slashes and all that sort of stuff, you can do that through a series of different ones. So the best example for that is if I open one of those files again, safely go to project. Yes, it's stayed there, libraries, goody. And you'll see here, I want to go through some really simple ones, just to sort of see how easy it is. So what I talked about before with the old database having the show cart and no show cart option, it was a particular value in the old database, but it was going to change in the new database because it was a completely different template. So what we did is we just wrote a little rule here that says that if you highlight these, you can say that if the category flight page piece of information has a value of noby.tpl, which was the way they used to do it, then the result goes into an if query. So it comes out as a true or false option. So if it is Clayton noby, then it will input the value of Clayton noby, but in a different way of writing it. If else, it would use the default template, which was just the value 0. So, and that was different in the old system as well. We had two different templates, whereas now we're just overriding it with a value or a 0. So through that, as you can see, this is relatively readable. A lot of people might go, nah, it doesn't make any sense. But for the people anyone that's suffered through this sort of situation, this sort of visual interface might make those sort of mappings through different individual problems something that's viable to be done, as opposed to having to think about this long project of developing something from scratch. Also, I want to show you one down the bottom here that looks really good. When in the old system there was no Ceph URL type planning, whereas in the new one they have to have what's called a Ceph slug.
The two databases that you're looking at.
Where do they come from?
Yeah, are they SQL databases or are they something else?
I'm running WAMP on this machine. They're both going through the ODBC through to a MySQL driver. So we've got MySQL driver. So I've got two MySQL databases as if they were on my server, but we've got no root. We've just got root access here, so we can do anything. But the connection we make when we bring this database over here. So the first thing we do is we go in and we drag a database onto the screen. So we just insert a database, and there it is there. It asks us, we can pre-assign databases too, so if we're working in a project and we say, well, we want to set up some global resources, so every time we go in, we don't have to go to the ODB assignment and click 3 buttons. We can go to global resources, and you can see here that I've got 2 databases locally. What do they show you? And you can see there that the real database that we're connecting to is clay25_25db, and the old one was the JOS. And you can see we run cPanel, so it's using the client in front of the database name, and the old JOS, I think it's, well, it's I think I renamed it, but it's the JOS format database.
So it's one's a 1.5 Vegemite 1
Yes.
table
Yes.
in your database going to your 2.5 Vegemite 2
Yes.
table that's associated.
Yep, that's the simplest method to start off with, and we're going to go through a couple more too.
Yeah, I know like in your case it's too complex database, like you got like lots of related products and everything. So it's not an easy migration. But for the user who are not technical,
Yes.
they might not be able to use
Well,
that.
this I believe has a middle ground, because anyone that's too technical might have a better way to do it, and they might have the resources to just throw 2 nerds at it and go, bang, it's done.
Because
We did it in 3
I came
hours.
across the same situation. Like I want to migrate one of my 1.5 website to 2.5.
Yep.
And they got like 700 products, and I don't want to do them to re-enter all 700 products.
Yep.
And I found a website which says shopping-cart-migration.com.
Yep.
And they charge you 50 bucks, 1,000 products, 500 customers, 500
Any sort of assurance, because this was a big commercial product, and we couldn't afford to rely on an untrustworthy
source. I
source.
haven't found any issue.
Mm.
And like virtually, you can migrate data from any shopping cart to any shopping cart.
Wow.
So ask commerce to Virtumart,
Yep.
or Virtumart to preloaded, any shopping cart, Magento to Virtumart, and they tell you like the estimate, and it's just like doing
Yep.
a true version of.
I have seen some of those other sellers out there doing similar things. The ones I found, I didn't really trust. I wasn't sure whether it was going to do the right job.
They give you the demo for 50 products.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to pay before you try,
All right.
they transfer your 50
Yeah.
products.
So
try it out.
that's a good example. If you can find those solutions, you can trust them and you can implement them. That's great.
I've used them for a few times.
Mm.
And
Well, if you don't need that solution, then that's fantastic. But in this circumstance, I didn't see that I had an option. So
You can also use a starter.
that's right, and that's where we're going to go with that too. This is basically talking about Virtumart here, but you think about anything to anything, it starts to really make the mind boggle. So talking about the databases, yep. So we've got 2 database connections, just the old one and the new one, and then each time we drag the database in, I just asked it what table I wanted it to show for me. So I'm not going to sort of go into too much about how that happens, because there is a bit of a learning curve there too, because you can do a lot with it. You can actually write SQL scripts to select a specific thing from the old one, or filter out just 3 fields, and you just get custom type outputs. So it's very powerful in what you can do just in connecting to a database and what you want to get from it. I want to show you the Ceph slug that we did. It took a couple of minutes to think of, because I knew what it needed to do. I knew there was a title over here, and it had to have a Ceph slug over here. Standard format for Ceph slug text, if you've seen your aliases in your content pages, is just all lowercase. Take out all the spacing, replace it with underscores, and hyphens, and that's it. That's basically, and take out any nasty characters and stuff. So that's all good, that's done in content, but over here I didn't have that, so I had to make something that did it, and it wasn't hard. All I did was I just said, well, let's have the title. So I dragged an arrow, and you'll see over here, sorry it's not much screen to work with, but you'll see over here, we've brought the name across, and we've done something with that, but we've just done a bit of cleansing on it. But also too, we brought it down here, forced it through a lowercase, so it's taking the value and forcing it through a lowercase, result output comes in, and then it translate. It's a special little translate tool that when you read the tooltips for it and you get to know what it does, it's basically any value in here replaces with any value. So any value in this, I'm not sure if, are they highlighting? Yes. Any value here is being replaced by any value here, because I wasn't sure of exactly whether it was the right way to do it. I just said, well, any value in here is replaced with nothing, so therefore I took them out. So that was just strip character basically. Then we had the output, and then we put it through to a normalised. That meant that if there were stripped characters and those characters might have had a space on either side, that means there was 2 spaces, and we just wanted 1 space between each word. So the normalised spaces tool just basically normalises the space. It just says word, space, word, space, word. It takes spaces off the front and the end of the variable we're pumping through it. Then we did at the very end, then we did the replace, and we just replaced any spaces left over with hyphens, and we had our Ceph slug output, so that allowed us to put it straight into the database table. So I didn't need to know a whole bunch of programming if that's all I needed to do. Or let's say we had a database that had mostly the same stuff on both sides, but there was only a couple of small tweaks you wanted to do, like GST. So we wanted to do a math formula to do the divide by 1.1 or whatever to get the GST, pre-GST price of the product value before we pump it over to here. Then we were able to do it with just a simple piece of thing in the middle. Now, if you can see there, this first one, I think I had a couple of different tables. You can see on the right-hand side, I've got more than one table. Now, some of the exciting parts about this too is when you're in production or testing of this stuff, if you think you've got it wrong, you can read the output and it shows you what it will look like as SQL. So it's saying, well, let's just run a okay. So just flicking over to output, it then runs it through the process. A couple of things it did there too. If you look down the bottom, you'll see a couple of green ticks. It looked at everything that I'd written and told me whether I'd done anything wrong too. So if I'd mucked something up, it would have stopped me before I did it. So if I was trying to inject a date field into an alphanumeric piece of text into a time date field, it wouldn't have let me do it. It would have said, no, you can't do that to that. And you can see there that it's just each individual piece of information is an insert into. So it's doing one line at a time, and it looks very labour intensive, but it's actually not. Especially running on localhost, the actual pumping of the data from point A to point B is really quick. I was actually initially testing this on a server, so I was actually doing it through remote network or remote connections and pulling the data down and throwing it up into a sample website up on my server. So I wanted to do it in a place where I knew it was going to be functioning 100%, so I didn't trust doing it in a WAMP environment. And that's all possible through the ODBC. Does people know what ODBC database connections is? It's not really essential knowledge, but basically it just allows this computer to talk to a MySQL database with a set of permissions through this, a MySQL driver. So it just makes it Windows friendly for me, so I can get in and use a program like this, but I'm working with a MySQL database on a server or on a local server or whatever. So looking at the categories thing, we can see that it's output all that information. It's output a lot of information. So this is the real stuff too. It's not the real stuff, but it's the real data from the old database. It's not the actual database, of course. So we can see there's a fair few pieces of information there that's done. It's actually run 3 conversions in that one process. So that's a little bit more complicated, but I want to go to another one. Might be a bit more simple. Back to project. Can you see if there's any water, mate, or even in my bag up there? Oh, you grab one. Thanks, Phil. Have a look. All right, so the hard part was, though, that I actually had to learn what both databases did and how they work. So that is another learning curve as well. If you didn't have to do it, it'd be much nicer. But knowing how long I'd spent sort of looking at the infrastructure, I had a pretty good understanding of what it was doing wrong in the manual migrations and things. So I had started to get a good understanding of how the table structure worked in the new Joomla, new Virtumart. The I won't go through medias, price discounts. No, that was a third party. Medias.
This also mean that if we get, as a company, we get a similar situation arise, we can just give you a call and say, "Can you give us a quote on migrating
Well,
this?"
I'm going to talk about trying to do it open source mentality. The product's proprietary, but I like to think that what I've built there isn't the best way to do it. And actually, I will come back to it because I'm addressing exactly that. Sorry?
You do it for free?
No. Give it to you.
Rest of your part.
If there was other people, I'd definitely do it as a service, but I don't think I'd be very. It's not a fun service. But
That's what we give you to you.
that's right. But what I'm looking at is I'll address it now, what I'm looking at is trying to get the information out there, so if we had a common focus on our Joomla group or our Joomla community needing Virtumart, Fokker, something, we all have a need for certain conversions, and if